how many players are going to be willing to stay and play if the majority of the squad aren't going to be there? We've already seen an exodus of players. At the very least, they've left the country, so they're not in the country right now, and are obviously awaiting the outcome of the PFL, awaiting the outcomes of pandemic.
Welcome to Across the Line. This is a very important episode that we have for you, as we have just gotten some groundbreaking news in the world of Philippine club football. The owners of Ceres Negros have pulled out their support for the club, and the management of the club is currently looking for new investors. This is a breaking point in Philippine club football that has perhaps been coming or looming for quite some time, but it has repercussions over the last 10 years of the trajectory of Philippine club football. And Chris, we really get an opportunity to dive deep into the subject.
Yeah, Jing, 10 years since the miracle in Hanoi, and this has certainly been one of the biggest news stories since the formation of the PFL. And yeah, where do we really go from here? It's definitely a watershed moment. It's definitely difficult to see how the league will continue in its current guise. We've obviously had teams pull out before, but to have the beacon of light, the beacon of Philippine football, looking like they're going to be no more, I think it is a significant moment in a domestic game, and the repercussions of that we'll have to wait and see. But obviously we spoke a lot about how we think it's going to impact the domestic games. We talk a lot about how the build up to this outcome has come, and they're not the first club to pull out, are they, Jing? We've had other clubs pull out from the PFL in the last 2-3 seasons, but none of the magnitude, none of the stature of Ceres Negros. So how we can push forward this, how the domestic game will be impacted by this, is what we discuss in a lot of depth in this episode.
A 10-year ride has culminated in this, and the big question that we're asking is this the end for Philippine club football? And we get an opportunity to really go deep into that in this episode. And if you like it, please do subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. And as this is a topic that will be talked about over the next few weeks, we invite everybody to share their thoughts. We're very much curious to hear what your take is on it, and message us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. Let us know what you think and what you foresee for Philippine club football in the near future. So without further ado, enjoy this episode between Chris Greatwich and myself on this Football Friday. 4 months into the quarantine period here in the Philippines, and as you'd expect, Philippine football has been feeling the strain. Today, on this very day, there has been some incredible news that has come out, breaking news, so to speak, and it is a confirmation of what has been a month long of rumors regarding the future of Ceres Negros. Today, it was announced that their ownership has removed their stake into the club and are now hoping that the club be acquired by new ownership if they are to continue in the AFC Cup for 2020, and if they are going to participate in the PFL. Ceres Negros is the biggest club in the Philippines and the most successful one over the last 5 years, and now they are no more. And to speak about it, of course, is Christopher Greatwich and myself. Chris, huge news in Philippine football.
Massive news for Philippine football. The rumors have been circulating for a number of weeks now. It's sort of gathered pace, hasn't it, in the last week or so, on the message boards, on the Facebook pages of various fan networks, and confirmation of what most of us already knew was announced earlier on today. What does this mean for Philippine football, Jing? I don't want to sound somber, but in light of what's been going on in in recent months, in recent years, tempered with the COVID-19 virus. We're seeing a lot of football clubs fold in this region. We've seen a lot of clubs express their difficulties in just managing to keep the clubs afloat in Europe, for example, in some of the biggest leagues in the world. And is this the end for Philippine football on a club level? I don't want to sound dramatic. I don't want to sound too, I don't go over the top with making a statement like that. But it just feels as though, I think for a number of years now, the PFL has been treading water. We've seen dwindling numbers in terms of support. Clubs have been dropping out each and every year. Is this the end for club football in the Philippines as we know it?
Oh, wow. Man, what a way to start off a podcast, right? I mean, that is the ultimate question, and a question that needs to be asked, right? I sincerely hope not, because that means I'm out of a job, right? So that's number one. That would suck. But I don't think you're wrong in, at least in my mind, the way we see club football today. This version of club football has essentially breathed its last breath, right? Ceres Negros was the shining light of Philippine football over the last 5 years, right? The things that they have accomplished, not only inside the country, but all over the continent of Asia, has been sensational and something worthy of immense praise. Winning the AFC Cup, being a part of another final, being in the semis last year, their crazy Champions League runs. They've pushed well above what anybody would have dreamed of for Philippine football at this given time. But now that they're gone, it's sort of like shined a light as well on all the holes that Philippine club football still currently has. And glory chasing and chasing trophies on this scale, it has a price, man. And the price is pretty large. And if your business is a fleet of buses that are currently parked and unable to shuttle people back and forth, or operating at 50% capacity, you don't have the money to finance the wage bill, which when you look at the players that they have, it's got to be gigantic. You're talking about Stefan Schrock, you're talking about Roland Muller, you're talking about Bienvenido Marañón, Super Herrera, and the legion of Philippine internationals that they have on that team. That can't be cheap. So I think operating a football club where you assemble this superstar squad, I think those days are over. And we don't need to just look at Ceres for that. I mean, you're looking at Global, or what Global used to be, overpaying players to get the best squad possible. That's out of the window. Meralco has folded as well. Davao has folded. And now Ceres. Everybody who's tried to assemble a superstar squad, eventually it reaches an endpoint. And Ceres has managed it a little bit longer than most because of the passion of Leo Ray Yanson. But man, it's I don't think you can run a club that way. And unfortunately for us, this is the end for maybe a little while of seeing Philippine clubs make it this far in continental competition.
Well, do you want to go through a little bit about what the statement had in that was made by Ceres? Do you want to just go through sort of the key points that was made by the club in their announcement that was made earlier today?
They essentially said that Leo Ray Yanson has pulled the plug on his support for the club. And they are looking, currently the management is looking for new investors, and they are speaking with a new investor that is interested in acquiring the club. So if the ownership change does push through, Ceres' membership in the PFF and in the PFL will remain as if nothing happened, right? Essentially, it is up to the ownership then to decide whether they're going to keep the roster, whether they're going to overhaul the roster. I'm sure there will be concessions made for both the PFL, the PFF, and the third, the AFC, right? AFC would not want a club to pull out of their competition, a team that is currently with 3 wins out of 3 in that competition and has been a massive force in the competition over the last 4 or 5 years. You don't want them pulling out, right? They might change their name, but as long as they remain in the competition, at least for 2020, they're going to want that. But that is the gist of what has transpired, right? Obviously, go ahead.
Yes. So with regards to that, let's have a look. Let's unpack this from the AFC standpoint. So what you're saying is, if they were to rename themselves under a new owner, they would still be able to compete in the AFC Cup competition. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting that has not been confirmed on the end of the AFC. Although I am assuming that you will not want to kick out a club that is still mid-competition, right? They might have changed their owners, but as long as they're still, the management is still the same, right? And there is a semblance of Ceres still existing, you're probably going to let them run, right?
Because I think I read somewhere that they were going to change their name. That was one of the things in the statement that they said that they were going to have to change their name. So I'm assuming that if they're going to be under new ownership with a different name, surely they can't compete on the Asian stage.
If they keep Negros, maybe they keep Negros. They still represent the same region. Obviously, keeping Ceres would be weird because the money is no longer coming from the bus line itself. But it's extraordinary times. I'm sure they could make extraordinary concessions given the circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that would be interesting to see how that would impact. Obviously, whichever investor or group of investors would be looking to invest in a club, naturally that would be an attractive proposition to be taking over a club that was still within touching distance of qualifying out of a AFC Cup group stage, if and when that happens. But for me, if you sort of take a sort of a longer term perspective on it, if I was to go in and I had the resources to buy a club, surely I just want to have a clean slate, absorb either a team or invest in a club or a city or a region, completely independent, without any baggage, where you can put your own stamp on your region, on your club, on your team, and start completely afresh. I know that in the statement they said that they had investors who they were talking to. I was wondering in this current climate who that would be, and why would they not just want to go and set up shop independently in a brand new region with a brand new team, clean slate, and start afresh. I mean, we've seen. I know you're wearing a Home United jersey today.
Yeah.
Jing. So I mean, I know they've changed their name recently. And it was a change of ownership also, right? They had a change of ownership, but that was at the end of a season cycle. Correct me if I'm wrong. But are they still participating in AFC competition, or did they not qualify this year?
They did not qualify this year.
Okay.
So the Lion City Sailors, their franchise was purchased, I believe, right? Which would be a similar kind of scenario with Ceres Negros. So whatever their name might be, what you're requiring there is the license was acquired by the club in order to operate, right? So if you keep the management intact, essentially what you are guaranteeing is that the management understands what it takes to meet the requirements that your license demands, right? If they're able to do that, then you can still assume that this new entity will be run at least to a certain degree, to a level of professionalism that is acceptable, with the necessary venues and requirements that fill what the licensing requires. So that's what I think. So the question really, though, for me is, do you want to run it the same way? Are you gonna, like, if you were to, okay, you acquire the license, you're still in the competitions that you want to be in, are you gonna try to put out the same roster that Ceres currently holds? Because that is a strain on your budget like nobody's business, and it is the time of pandemic. Who has that kind of cash right now?
I think that's a massive question, And then obviously, how many players are going to be willing to stay and play if the majority of the squad aren't going to be there?
Right.
We've already seen an exodus of players. At the very least, they've left the country, so they're not in the country right now, and are obviously awaiting the outcome of the PFL, awaiting the outcomes of pandemic regulations to be less restrictive, and then kind of making a call as to whether or not they're going to be coming back. But yeah, definitely as a business model, and we've spoke about this before on the show. If you look at in terms of what's in common with all of those clubs that you've mentioned there who have pulled the plug on their operations, all singular individuals who have had primary ownership of the club, who have either lost interest or have been unable to continue to fund the operation.
Yeah.
And what we've been saying from the get-go, since we've been doing this podcast, since we've been having conversations about this sort of topic, is there needs to be a sustainability factor to any club that's going to go into operation. Now, obviously, you look at someone like Meralco, maybe they're the exception because obviously they were run by an electricity power corporation.
Yeah.
But I just feel if you're at the mercy of one individual and their funds, inevitably you're in a very precarious position. If you look at how clubs operate in Germany, for example, a lot of them are fan owned, or they have some ownership of the club. It's built around the community, and therefore you have an obligation to be running in a professional, in an organized manner, because you owe it to the people of that community. It's the same in the UK. A lot of them are former teams of the factory workers, and then they have that sense of community. People obviously converge on the stadium on the weekend to support their clubs, and they have all of the infrastructure there. Even at the lower leagues, you have the clubhouse where people will go and they will drink or socialize during the course of the week. People have their birthday parties. It's multifunctional. We can't have teams in our league paying $25,000 a month to an individual player. And we don't have a training facility, or you don't have your own stadium. It just doesn't seem to make sense to have that sort of top-down approach, because invariably it's taken this pandemic, or it's taken an owner to lose interest, to find ourselves in a situation that we have now, which is we are scrambling for teams simply to compete at the PFL.
Yeah. It's what we've essentially seen now, I believe, is the popping of what has been a bubble that has been growing over the last 5 years, right? Ever since the focus moved into filling the requirements of the Asian Football Confederation and ensuring that we meet those high standards, the expenses have inevitably gone up, right? On top of the fact that you have teams that have invested extra in order to thrive on this new stage, that has left other clubs with a mountain to climb with regards to meeting the level of quality on the pitch. But also it has not robbed, but it has taken the focus away from building your foundations strongly as football clubs, right? The focus has been on winning. And, there have been some great highs with, winning the ASEAN Zone final, seeing them play in places like Japan and Thailand and Australia and winning matches. That has been incredible. And no Ceres fan would tell you that those moments won't live forever in their psyches. My question is, was it worth it? Was the trade worth it, right? Was glory hunting this early in our club football history, so to speak, worth it, rather than spending what could have been a more boring 5 years building the clubs up from scratch, right? as you said, embedding yourself in the community, getting yourself the clubhouses, making sure that you have systems for merch and getting people into the stadiums who are paying customers, and opening your clubs up to your loyal fans to have a stake in the club. Even all of these revenue streams don't exist in Philippine football. It exists from one source, and that is your main sponsor or your main benefactor, and that is it. Right? If his business takes a hit or that business takes a hit, then you are first on the chopping block, as the value in return of your football club, let's face it, is not as high as what is being put into them. Right? Commercial value coming back is how many eyeballs are there. Is the product that you're seeing on the television, if it is on TV, is it that good that you're confident that the sport is going to grow? What indicators are saying that the football is growing or the community is growing because you've put in efforts A, B, and C? Those questions need to be asked now, right? I mean, I think it's becoming more and more clear to everyone that if we continue walking down this road, we're all going to end up like Ceres. We're all going to end up in the same boat, which is non-existent, right? Unfortunately, I think that's what I see.
Yeah, I think one of the key things you mentioned there is, let's say, for example, I'm looking at the Ceres model, and no one expected the pandemic situation to occur. So I think for large number of teams, you budget for the year, you don't expect there to be a mass pandemic that's going to hit the global economy. So you have to take that into consideration. However, I'm looking at exactly what you said, people chasing that dream, not looking at the infrastructure, not taking into consideration grassroots. And that, for me, well, one of the things you mentioned there, which was, let's say, for example, we were chasing the compliance with the AFC. How many of those things are actually still in place now that could benefit the club down the road? Things like having a bona fide academy where you could potentially pull players from an academy setup. You know, none of those clubs that I can think of that are visibly in that PFL competition now, how many of them have bona fide youth academies where they can pull their resources from that academy? I don't think there's that many. So Kaya's probably the only one, right? And that for me is a massive problem. You know, I know that Sarah spent a lot of money on the regeneration of the stadium, for example, upgrading the seats. How much of that is now applicable to the club? It's all very sort of short-term gains. Let's try and get the short-term gain. Let's try and bring in some really big name players, get quick hit, quick fix, maybe get us to an AFC Cup competition. Maybe we win a domestic competition. Maybe we win the league. And then let's see where it takes us. And I think one of the things that is a massive, massive misgiving, I don't necessarily blame the clubs here because they've had very limited experience themselves. But the PFF, the governing body, they should have been more involved in assisting clubs in getting their compliance all in order and ensuring that clubs were running a sustainable model. And I think AFC also have a lot to answer for with that as well. You know, they needed to be more involved as essentially a startup league in ensuring that all of the compliance was met by the clubs. And if those regulations were not met, then they either need to be sanctioned in some way or given the means to upgrade in certain areas to enable them to participate in competitions further down the road. Because what? Go ahead. No, you go ahead, Jing.
I think on paper, they met it. Everybody who is involved in AFC, for example, AFC Cup competition, meets those standards on paper. That's the problem, right?
Do they though, Jing? Did they though, Jing?
Technically, yes.
I'm not too sure about that. I mean, maybe in terms of the AFC caliber team, so that would include Kaya and Ceres in this. But I remember when we did the compliance, when the PFL was formulated, and we would sit down and we would go through point by point with the PFL delegate, and you'd have to go through each and every point and make sure, yeah, okay, you've got that, you've got X number of turnstiles at your facility, you have a youth academy, you have revenue streams coming from outside, and it's all checked, it's all checked.
Yeah.
We both know that the majority of the clubs don't have those, do not meet the criteria in that regard.
Right.
We know that. We know that, Jing. You know, we know that. I mean, not in terms of like a bona fide youth structure. I mean, obviously, Ceres has the affiliate with the universities, and they have a sort of a branch of that here in the metro area. But they don't have like a formal academy as you would find, let's say, for example, in Europe. You know, where there is a bona fide streamlined structure that feeds into a first team that is geared upon trying to develop and cultivate talent to come and play it into your first team. So, you know, those sorts of things are missing. You know, those things were sadly awry. And then, you know, like we said before about the training ground situation, you know, we were going on to do training sessions, you know, after Frisbee had finished at Achilles Hill, for example. Like, I can't think of any professional organisations that were having to wait, you know, for another sport to finish before you got onto the training field to conduct your training sessions. For me, it's just that short-term, short-sightedness, the lack of planning from both club and governing body has left us in this predicament. And the pandemic has obviously hit at the worst possible time for the league because it was already struggling, the wheels already coming off. You know, we've already seen last year where we had a league for 2 games on the same day, and then the following week it went back to the previous league structure. We've had teams pull out for various reasons over the past 3-4 years. It just feels like it's the end of a cycle. And again, like I said to you at the top of the conversation, I don't want it to seem like it's all doom and gloom, but I think it's a great time now for reflection, and maybe it's an opportunity for the powers that be to get together and maybe think of a new way forward, learn from the mistakes that clubs have made, and try to come back with a more bona fide, long-term, sustainable plan that clubs can follow and that will enable there to be some longevity within club football here in the Philippines.
I think you hit it there on the head, you know? I mean, the pandemic has accelerated the process, but we already knew that we were kind of heading in this direction. So it has just highlighted further the need for a real assessment of what needs to be done in Philippine football, right? I mean, Rick Olivares is back writing football news these days, and he came out with one recently that talks about the accountability in Philippine football, and thinking about what model that we're currently exercising and whether or not it's the right path to walk down. And it might take the implosion of a club like Ceres for us for it to really hit home, you know, that maybe this isn't the best way to do this, right? I mean, we've earned ourselves a playoff spot. No, not even a playoff spot, a group stage spot in the Champions League. That's how we are regarded in the continental stage as Philippine clubs, that we win. If we place second or win the competition or win the cup, we're going to move ourselves straight into the group stage of the Champions League. They think that we are this entity that is ready for this level of competition, when in truth, there's just 1 or 2 standouts that are pushing above their weight, well above their weight, right? But if we're going to make it something sustainable as a environment of Philippine football, then, as you say, there needs to be a real clear picture and a new path laid down as to how we were gonna do this. The question is, what road is that? What do you want to see, right? We're gonna come out of this pandemic with potentially a shortened season. Hopefully, that still pushes through, and a compressed AFC Cup schedule. 2020. Let's assume there is not going to be a vaccine or a cure in 2020, and let's just push ahead and say midway through 2021, we are still in the same kind of state, right? let's not be too optimistic. Let's just say 2021 third quarter is when we're going to get an opportunity to get into a state of normalcy once again. Where does that leave us? How do you foresee the remaining clubs acting? And do you see potential new clubs getting interested in being involved in Philippine football at this point?
I think you hit hit a great point with Rick Oliveras. He's been writing some really excellent stuff in the past week or two. We haven't heard from him for about 5 years, and then all of a sudden he's been coming out with some really, really insightful pieces. So I've actually been speaking to Rick about them and been encouraging him to continue to put some more really good content out there. And what absolutely the accountability one that he put out was absolutely fantastic. It again, you said it hits the nail on the head in so many different topics, so many different subjects, from grassroots football to the owners being on the clubs to build a more sustainable model. So many things that he's put up in recent weeks have been fantastic. So shout out to Rick. He's been brilliant. What I think as a model that worked, and one of the things that Rick highlighted in his articles were, at one point, I think in the UFL, he said there were 24 or 26 clubs across the two divisions. Mm-hmm. And then I think you had a couple of guest teams that were participating in some of the cup competitions. So there were enough teams there to suggest that there is interest in club football. And you only have to look back to the old videos of UFL games at McKinley Hill, and it'd be packed. 2,000 people crammed into that tiny stadium. Live on the TV networks. Fantastic atmosphere, and the passion and enthusiasm for the game at that time was really, really heightened. Teams weren't spending too much beyond their means, I would say. Some teams were obviously spending more than others, but I think a lot of teams were operating within, justifiable parameters. I would like to see a similar type of model come back, if I'm being quite honest. I know we've talked about having, I think the Sevens League are doing a good job of trying to have something central here in Manila, and then trying to do pocket tournaments, pocket competitions out in the provinces. I think that's a great model to have, even from an 11-a-side standpoint. I think we could have a centralised league here, try to get it on a television network, bring down the cost for teams to operate, franchise fees included, have no limits or no restrictions on foreigners. I think that was a huge change in policy that affected a number of different clubs, especially clubs like Nomads, for example, who were one of the pillars of the football community, and over the course of one summer were just wiped off the face of the domestic football. I think for those clubs, like for example Kaya, who want to participate in AFC caliber competitions, that they should again hold themselves accountable to adhering to those rules, play with the 3+1 rule. Okay, it might give a little bit of a benefit and an advantage to some of the other clubs who have participated in the competition. But if you want to build a more sustainable league, I think that's what's going to have to happen. I definitely think there needs to be, again, as Rick Oliveira has highlighted, there needs to be some sort of categorization on clubs as well, making them accountable. So I know that they're talking about having people in the provinces, football associations in the provinces, what is your 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan? Take a look at some of these clubs. Right, Kyle, what have you got? Right, well, we have a 30-man roster. We have qualified PTs. We have coaches with the requisite license. We have a youth academy, etc., etc., etc. Okay, you get a certain charter, or you set a certain category 1. PFF standard. If you're a club that simply just has a men's team, your coach doesn't have the requisite license, you don't have a full-time medical staff, etc., etc. Okay, then you might get a different categorization. And with that level of categorization, what are you eligible? Okay, you might not be able to qualify for AFC competitions, right? But can we then assist you in certain ways to help uplift you and elevate your level? I think that's what it's about. We've got to try to help each other. One thing I was really confused about with some of these guys that are going in and just pumping in so much money into one individual club is, do you not want to see the entire football community thrive? Do you not want to see the entire scene thrive? Would you not want to be involved maybe on a more managerial level or on a league level where you can have a broader sphere of influence? There's obviously that ego thing that comes with, I want to own a club and I want to have the best club and I want to go in and perform exquisitely on the regional stage, and that's great. And I fully admire what Sarah's accomplished, because at the end of the day, they put Philippine football on the map. But obviously, what that then created was this vacuum where all of the other clubs were trying to keep pace, and it just wasn't sustainable. And that is the key for me. Is building that sustainable model. I look across, and we're looking at teams like Thailand and thinking that that's a model that should be replicated. But I'm looking at Cambodia. I look at Cambodia and see how they're doing things, which might seem a bit of an obscure one. But have you seen some of the stadia in Cambodia? Some of the training facilities out of Cambodia. They're getting good crowds. They're on television. They're slowly building the foundations to having a really bona fide and good quality domestic product. And I think exactly what you said, although it might take 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, that's a model that we should be looking to. We can't keep looking for these quick fixes. We can't keep looking for these quick hits, because invariably what we're going to be left with is what we've got right now, which is, I mean, I don't want to, again, I said it at the top of the program, but we are now left with this question, which is this now the end for club football here in the Philippines as we know it? And if that's the case, 10 years on from the miracle of Hanoi, that would be the biggest travesty.
I think, the more that we expound upon it, the more that we discuss it, I don't think it is. I don't think it is then. I think it's a new normal that's on the horizon. And the thing is, it's made it very, very clear that there is change that needs to be done, right? So, I mean, the learning process is not necessarily convenient or desirable in the lessons that it teaches, but we are now fully absorbed with what we've been taught over the last 10 years of how to run club football. Now, the last 3 years have brought a lot of problems, right? I mean, like we said, the acceleration of needing to meet all of these requirements has taken a toll on the clubs, on the entire community as a whole. But I see some positives as well that we can take from this, right? The professionalism that was pushed onto all the clubs to a certain degree that has been practiced by the likes of Stallion, Kaya. Everybody who's been involved actually has been witness to a new level of organizational capacity that they need to operate on, which is quite interesting to me, because organizationally we're not too different from how a league operates, right? You can host your own matches, you know how to do that, right? You have your own media, your own marketing team. You have the capability to set up practices and know how to run the club into a reasonable budget. These are things that you can then move along and create, as you said, into a wider sphere of influence in your own community, which you should already be attached to anyway, and start seeing how might you be able to use your expertise that you've picked up over the last 3 years of trying to go super pro, and use that as a means to influence your community, right? Maybe the UFL doesn't have to exist the way the UFL existed 5 years ago, but maybe we will see the UFL sprout up all over the country this time, right?
Yeah.
And maybe, sponsors will understand that maybe my mileage is a little bit better if I'm running a league rather than just a club, right? Glory hunting. Because the interesting thing is, these owners don't think that they weren't helping Philippine football. I believe in their minds, they were elevating the game. right? Creating a level of status that would make it undeniable for crowds to come. Man, if they're winning against clubs from Tokyo and Thailand, maybe I should check out Ceres Negros, right? And because we didn't know how this would end, it's a viable way of thinking that success will bring attention, right?
I think that's a massive point, and that's something I really want to get across to everyone. Is I don't think it's anyone's fault. Like when I was talking about ego earlier, I didn't mean that in a necessarily in a negative way. It's more like it's a natural human response to want to be successful, to want to go and chase the trophy. Like I totally get that, and I think you're absolutely spot on. The intentions of everyone was 100% positive. It was all because they wanted to influence the domestic game. They wanted to push the boundaries, and they did it the way that they thought was best at that particular moment in time. Absolutely no doubt about that. So I think that's one thing we have to be very clear about. And only with the benefit of hindsight are we saying this. So it's not really to call anyone out. It's more to be like, this is really like the best way forward probably would have been for them to try to generate some sort of league or help out across a broader spectrum to enable there to be some more sustainability. But one thing I think you've really hinted on there, which I think is important, and it's a question that I wanted to bring to you, Jing. I'm not sure if anyone's really thought about this as an idea, but one of the conclusions that I've come to recently, I think, is that in the Philippines, is football a seasonal sport? And what I mean by that is when you're in the UK, when Wimbledon comes on, for example, everyone busts out the tennis rackets. Everyone goes down their local tennis courts. They play tennis for those 2 weeks. And then I'm going to say majority of people won't bring out their tennis rackets for another 11 and a half months. You know, football, however, is a religion. It's every day. It's on television. It's on the 24-hour sports news cycles. It's on the front page, on the back page of the newspapers. It's everywhere. It's unmissable. It's undeniable.
Right.
Football here in the Philippines, it just doesn't have. It just doesn't have that. It doesn't resonate with the public in that way. Other than basketball, does sport really? I mean, even look at Pac-Man. Pac-Man will fight twice a year, so he's very seasonal also. In respect to how and it's consumable because it's anyone can tune in for that Sunday morning bout in Las Vegas twice a year. It's pretty that's very doable. So that was the other thing I was thinking about with regards to football, and I would love a year-round product. I think is necessary because you still need to have that development and you still need to strive for the level of professionalism that you have on the continent with some of our Southeast Asian neighbours and what you have across the world, really, because football is a year-round sport. But is that something that we just have to accept as a Philippine community? And it's going to take time in order to try to turn that tide, to make it a more, a weekly event. You go and watch a football game. You go down to the stadium and watch it. Is that something it's going to take time? And is that something that can be changed over a sustained period of time with the right level of investment, with the right work in the communities, with the right marketing? Do you think that's possible, or do you think that football will forever be a seasonal sport?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it will be. I choose to believe that because we have learned the lesson, right? I think we're continuing to walk down this road, and fittingly so, 10 years after the miracle in Hanoi. Prior to the miracle in Hanoi, Philippine football was in utter obscurity, right? In the darkness, nobody really knew except for the people that were interested already, right? You get a hint of success in qualifying into the semifinals. All of a sudden, you are relevant and everything descends upon you. And everybody knows you. And football is one of the highest highs it has ever been. So it makes sense, therefore, to think that success equals attention, which equals money, and that this is the model that we should be chasing. Let's get the best possible talent into the country, pay whatever it takes so that we can reach the highest highs and bring the attention back into the sport, right? It's reasonable to think that way given the way the road led to this place. But now that we're here 10 years later, we see that that might have been faulty thinking. That might have been faulty way of reasoning, right? In order for it to not be a seasonal sport where we only wait for Suzuki Cup to come around every 2 years, or for the odd Asian Cup campaign, or for all of us to get behind one club who is participating in the Champions League, for example. In order for that to happen, then we need to, as you say, make it into a year-round thing. And the only way to do that is if we immerse the public into the sport. If you immerse the public in the sport, then they are going to be interested to come out and watch players play. Because the quality that we're going to produce, especially if we're not going to be paying over the odds for the likes of Stefan Schrock and individuals of that caliber, is that the quality is going to drop, right? That's one of the positives that we had over the last 3 years, is that the quality has been raised tremendously of the football. I mean, local homegrown players are getting used to the level of play in Asia, which is tremendous for the level of play. But it has come at a drawback of large proportions elsewhere in the industry, right? And we're seeing that now. But what we really need is to be able to address that in a way. So the quality is going to drop, but how are we going to entice people to keep watching a product that perhaps is a little less than what we have now? And my answer to that is to immerse them into the culture, right? Have them be attached to the players, have them be emotionally attached to the competitions, to the fate of their club, of their community. Essentially, that's the way I see it, because there are so many examples over the course of history of quality of play not being that good, but as long as there is a passion behind it, there's a reason for them to come out and watch these players play and compete, then the people will come, the people will watch. They're not there to watch the very best footballers play. Especially if you're a casual, you don't understand what the best football looks like. You're there to watch emotions. You're there to watch drama, right? Which can transpire in a 3-on-3 game on the side of the road. If you're keen enough of an observer, there's some dramatic intramural matches that you will go home and speak to with your parents or your friends. Like, man, you should have seen this game after school a while ago, man. It was a crazy game. That could happen at any level of play. So as long as we involve the individuals or the fans, the community, into the stories of these players, the stories of the paths that these teams are on, then I think we have a shot. I think we have a shot at getting people involved in the sport year round. But then it becomes a football. It's almost as if we have to preach the gospel of football all over the Philippines. That's what needs to be done over the next 5 to 10 years, is just immerse the young generation in the sport, have them grow into individuals who live and breathe football on a regular basis. And it's just normal for them to see how their club is doing every week, right? I mean, just like in the UK, watching, let's say, like Newcastle United have had their ups and downs, but they've always had their fans, right? And they're always interested to see how they're going to fare this weekend. And that's because the community is ingrained in the culture of that club. So we need to strive for something like this. I think glory hunting and success hunting is not going to bring us what we want. And unfortunately, it requires long-term thinking, right? Which means people we need to get an investment. We need to get a commitment from people to think not in 2-3 year increments, but 5, 10, 15-year increments. Are you willing to invest 15 years of your life so that you can look back 15 years later and say, this is what we've built? That's the thinking that needs to be ingrained, I think, in this batch of disillusioned people inside the industry now who see that the bubble has popped. Now what are we going to do, right? I don't think it's going to disappear completely because there are too many passionate people about the game, right? You and I included. So I think it's up to individuals like ourselves to then maybe speak about what could be done. And this is how I foresee it. That's just me.
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant. I think it needs to be someone independent from the clubs, almost maybe even independent from football, to just come in with completely fresh ideas, fresh impetus, And exactly what you said, they have to engage in the community. I've always said, and we spoke about this a lot on the show, it has to be starting from grassroots initiatives. Why would you not start with that? You've got ready-made kids who already participate in the sport, who already love the sport, who want to go and watch these people up close and personal, and learn about the game. That's a prime place to start. And yet we don't have any grassroots initiatives, Jing, outside of those that are run by independent bodies, independent individuals, or separate entities, private companies, with their own initiatives. And these types of programs are baying for these types of opportunities to get involved and have this sense of community. I think the football community is a little bit lost, if I'm going to be honest with you. There's a lot of people wandering about going like, who can I attach myself to? Who can I talk about? It just isn't cohesive. It's not coherent. Like, one example I'll give you, Gina, I think was a really, really interesting comparison is there was an article written in the UK a few years ago about darts and speedway. So they were saying basically during like the 80s, 90s, the same amount of people would go to watch darts as they would go to watch speedway. And it's the same
speedway?
time.
Sorry? Speedway?
Speedway is essentially on an oval track. It's a motorcycle without brakes. It's on like and they would sort of you'd sort of lean into the corners and you'd end up skidding around the corners. Look it up, speedway. It's basically motorcycling on like an oval track. But darts and speedway would have the same amount of sort of viewership at the stadia, which would be not many. It would attract the same type of person, namely working class white people. Looking for a little bit of escapism where they could have a few pints with the pals. And it was a very sort of niche market that they were catering to. Fast forward now, darts is a multi-million pound industry, live on all the major networks. Their players are huge superstars, earning millions, huge crowds, raucous fan experience, and you would not believe the transformation it's had in such a short period of time, relatively speaking, short period of time. And obviously they got the investment, and obviously they took a lot of time in marketing the sport in the correct way. Mm-hmm. But now what you've got is, I would go to the darts. I'm not massively into darts. Like, I quite like playing darts, but essentially what you said is true. Like, it doesn't have to be necessarily the quality of the actual game. Like, realistically, that's 4,000 or 5,000 people cramming into a massive auditorium to watch two guys throw arrows at a tiny board. Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. Like, who in their right mind would pay good money for that? But the reason why they go and watch it is for the experience.
Yeah,
the fan experience is exquisite. And I look at the fan experience that we have. We've been to Carmona. It's not great. It smells like cow poop, horse poop, right? You've been down to Rizal on a Tuesday night. It's scary. It's scary. I look back to the McKinley Hill days. The fan experience was pretty good. For a fledgling league, it was pretty good. You get a lot of people down there. You had a little bit of buzz, a little bit of atmosphere. All the people that would come down, they weren't necessarily Kaya fans or global fans, but you'd still go and watch a midweek Stallions against Green Archers.
You get McDonald's in the stands.
You'd have a McDonald's in the stand. You'd have a chat with your pals. It was that's the type of community you're trying to create. And I'm looking at like Anton's League, and they have that to an extent. They're on the networks, but there is a community out there, but you've got to harness it and you've got to market it the right way. Yeah. And not look at it through the lens of necessarily exactly what you said, trying to put out the best possible product on the pitch. It's bigger than what's going on the pitch. You've got to be able to identify that and see that in a broader context. And I think it's going to take someone outside of football. It's going to take someone outside of our immediate network, I think, to be able to scale that out. And I think it's going to take a lot of involvement from a third party or a governing body to help the clubs, organize themselves properly.
It's quite interesting that you say that you think that it requires somebody from outside Because I'm seeing that after 10 years, James Young-husband, that is a piece of news that is huge as well, has retired from the game. Phil Young-husband is out. You're involved in the academy setup now. Anton is involved in sevens. Ali, for example, is involved in management of Kaya, but he could easily be involved outside of Kaya as well. What I'm seeing is a large group of highly influential individuals who have not only been crucial in the growth of the game, but have been privy and witness to all of its shortcomings over the last 10 years. Who better than you individuals and those that have been involved in the industry over the last 10 years to actively steer it in the right direction with the proper mindset of not trying to squeeze what I can out of the game, but to grow the game so that we can all enjoy a bigger piece of the pie later on, right? I think it's you guys. That's what I'm thinking would be the ideal group of individuals to kind of like you guys command respect, command influence, and could easily steer the ship if you guys so choose to join forces. And it'll be difficult to beat you guys in terms of clout, in terms of what you've brought to the game. I mean, who matches up?
I'm not saying we wouldn't want to be involved. My wife would say that because that's another job that I don't need to be undertaking. But you know, I feel it just needs fresh impetus. It needs a fresh pair of eyes. Someone who has no agenda. You know, no matter how you spin it, I would always have an agenda. I would always be pushing things from a grassroots perspective, always, and trying to push things from that standpoint. I'm not saying I couldn't be on an advisory board or you know part of some sort of council that would advise, you know, clubs in terms of youth policy and help them get their youth structure up and running. I would have no qualms about doing something like that. You know, would Anton be great in terms of trying to get someone to put the league on a television network or be head of marketing? Absolutely. But in terms of driving the league, in terms of actually having a completely fresh perspective on how to do it, I think that needs to be someone from outside, somebody who hasn't been pummeled, you know, with the grind of being involved in the politics of Philippine football. You know, someone who James Young-husband always used to call it. It's like a beat 'em up. Like one of those beat 'em up video games. Like there's that energy bar that just keeps going down and down and down and down, and eventually that final knockout blow, and then that's enough. You know, and then that guy's knocked out. I feel like we've been involved in it for so long, and we're in it so deep that I would love to be involved in it in some capacity if there was some sort of regeneration or rebirth of the domestic game here. But I just feel like someone with fresh ideas, you know, someone maybe even outside the industry, someone with a background in marketing, someone who has no real affiliation with football, but was able to surround himself with him or herself with the right people who are involved in it, who can guide them effectively. I think that would be the perfect marriage. Because I think that this bubble that we're in, this sort of football bubble, it can be toxic at times. That crab mentality is rife within our football community, and it's really sad. And I just feel like someone with some fresh impetus, fresh ideas would be able to take that forward on a long-term level. And just start afresh, just completely start afresh. Someone who's not tainted with the image of what it was when it was UFL. Someone who isn't tainted from the image of what they've seen in the last 3 or 4 years with the disbandment of the league, you know, with teams dropping out, etc., etc. That's just my personal take on it. I think there's a lot of positive people who could influence the game who aren't necessarily within it right now. But whoever it is, I've got to see it from a long-term perspective, Jing. That's really what it's got to be. Something that's sustainable, something that can be built out, and something that's going to help the next generation and generations to follow, because we can't keep going down this top-down model.
Yeah. I think if anything, this is the rallying call, right? I mean, for many, this is what the pandemic has been about, you know? It's like, it's a showcase of how brittle the foundations we all think we've built are, right? I mean, very quickly jobs have been lost and lives have been turned upside down. And right now we're getting a lesson in that in our industry. Philippine football, club football as we know it, has been turned on its head. And the question though remains is, how do we conduct ourselves afterwards, right? I mean, there is an opportunity that remains, or we could all just accept the fact that this is it. And we could go down and say that we gave it a shot. 10 years, it was a good run. We tried our best. And then whatever, it exploded. And what are we going to do about that? Let's all find other jobs. That's a viable road to take. I, for one, I'm not too much of a fan of that. The more that I look back at 10 years of being involved in Philippine football, the more I feel as if there's a reason why you went through all this. There's a reason why there's all this turmoil that you've seen, so that you are exactly the individuals who don't make that same mistake if you so choose to walk still in this path for the next 10 years, right? So if you stepped out of it and enjoyed a different life, then you won't get the full grasp of the difficulties that were necessary to learn these lessons. So we all have to take a look ourselves in the mirror for over the next few weeks and see what roles can we all play in saving Philippine football. I think everybody talks a big game and I love Philippine football. May Philippine football continue for a long time and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, everybody who has a circle of influence, who has an opportunity to make change, they need to step up. And this is it. There's no better time to show your worth than in a crisis, right? It's the only time. I mean, we're seeing it now, right? The lack of leadership or the presence of leadership is heightened, is multiplied by the fact that there is a crisis on hand. So the people who emerge over the next few weeks, there are going to be individuals that we will see who will likely be carrying the torch for many years to come if they so choose. That's, I feel, is what's at stake at the moment. So is it at the end of this version? Yes, I think so. I think we've seen it. We've ran it into the rocks, man. The wheels have fallen off. But yeah, there's a chance for rebirth, and we will see who steps up to the plate.
Okay. All right. Well, Jing, I mean, that's... I don't know whether that's a positive or negative. Just, part of me thinks it's sad that it's come to that. I almost said at the beginning of the conversation about there being a death of the league is... something it's a little bit controversial to try and stoke some fires, but to hear you say that, you think in its former guise, as we've known it for the last 6-7 years, that it is the end. That's quite sad. That is quite sad, Jing. I still have fond memories of playing in the UFL, playing in the PFL, coaching in the PFL, and seeing some of these players up close and seeing some of the magical talents that we were able to bring to the league. Players with some unbelievable experience. I mean, I feel like Rufus Sanchez back in the day. All the way up to seeing Phil, James, lots of Stefan Schrock obviously coming. People like Tony Doblas, for example, coming over. Played at a top level in Spain. It was a Bienve. Another one played at a really, really good level in Spain. It's sad to think that we might not see players of that caliber for the foreseeable future. It's sad to sort of think in those terms. If what you're saying is correct, but is this an opportunity now, Jing? Is this an opportunity to rebuild something that's more sustainable? Is this opportunity for us to now think about things from a different perspective, and let's maybe invest our time and energies on trying to attract people to the stadia? It's trying to get kids really active and involved in supporting their favorite local players, so local teams. Yeah. Having pockets of communities really get behind, certain initiatives and drives that are set by these clubs to enable us to have a more sustainable model, one that has, as you said, a broader sphere of influence, not simply just trying to go after the golden goblet of whatever that might be, AFC regional championships or playing in the Champions League, which on paper is obviously what you think about when you set up, as a playing career, you set about trying to play at the highest level, or competing in an FA Cup final or in a World Cup. But actually, when you step back and you think about it, if we can build something that has more longevity, then when we look back at 2010 as being the catalyst, although we have had bumps in the road, maybe this pandemic can be another watershed point where we said, no, we can't keep going down the road that we're going. And we need to seriously think about how we can create a more long-term, sustainable, more engaging football brand that the Philippine football public can get behind. And I think ultimately, if we can do that, although it seems like it's a pretty devastating period in Philippine football, maybe this is a watershed moment where we can come through on the other side and actually can be something much, much better.
We can only hope. I'm very much interested to hear as well what the listeners think and feel as if is on the horizon for Philippine club football. And if you have your thoughts, please do share it with us on social media. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. If you like this conversation, you like the content that we can produce here on Across the Line, definitely please do subscribe to the show on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate your support throughout this pandemic. It's been a great source of enthusiasm for us and to stay motivated in talking and speaking about football and being involved with the community. And as we said, if you have your thoughts on this, I'm sure it's a topic that will be divisive. There are people who are all in with the journeys that their clubs are currently on, and to turn that around will cause a great deal of discomfort. And there are individuals on the outside looking in who spot the pitfalls that we have fallen into over the last few years. So anything that you guys have would be great to spark a bit of a conversation. And with that, I think we've been able to speak about and discuss what, like you said, Chris, is a monumental moment for Philippine club football. It's been enjoyable, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the final point that I would like to make is piggybacking off what you said earlier. I think everyone has an obligation and everyone has a responsibility at this particular moment in time. If you are passionate about Philippine football, make yourself heard. Do what you can to support it. I remember seeing on those message boards before, people imploring, go to the ground, go to the games. Buy your local merchandise, help clubs out as best they can, because we all need the support. We all need the support to survive, because it is a very tumultuous period for many clubs. So, if it's a case of, like you said, buying the merchandise, liking, sharing videos of your favorite clubs, spreading the word amongst your friends. When it does reopen, get yourself down to the games, watch them when it's safe and viable, which might not be, around the corner. But I think that's really important. Do what you can to try and support your local football clubs, to support the football community as a whole, and do so as best you can, because without that, then the outlook is bleak. But if we can all pull together, then hopefully the brighter day is on the horizon.
There is hope yet for Philippine football. All right. Great chat. Thank you all for listening or for tuning in. And we hope to catch you on the next Football Friday.